Terence Bendixson is President Emeritus of Living Streets, an organisation he has been involved with for almost half a century under its present name and its previous incarnation, the Pedestrians Association. In 1974, he wrote the book Instead of Cars, where he talked about giving priority to walking, cycling, and public transport, what we now call active travel. So, Terence, what prompted you to write the book? And can you describe the politics of planning and mobility back in the 1970s?
Well, Peter, yes, thank you. I need to go back a little bit more because the great turning point, as far as I was concerned, was really 1969. I was working on The Guardian at that time. I wrote a piece not for The Guardian, but for some other journal, in which I made my position clear, which was that walking was the most important form of travel in cities, and we needed to forget about trying to provide for cars all over the place and start from a different position. And that article prompted Tom Foley, the founder of the Pedestrians Association, to get in touch with me. He gave me tea in St. Ermin's Hotel, and it was love at first sight. He'd been involved since 1929 in the association. I joined, as I say, in 69, and I've been party to that ever since. And I think the reason why I had come to my conclusions was that I went to school in London. I went to school at Westminster next to the Abbey. I then worked successively in Chicago, down in the Loop, working for a newspaper, and then in San Francisco. I did also work in LA for a period as well. So I'd had that experience, and I think that convinced me that cars didn't work in classic old-fashioned cities. Maybe they do work in LA, I'm not sure about that. And so that was my background, the background of my thinking. It led to me to think as I did in 1969. And then in the early 70s, I moved from The Guardian to work for OECD in Paris in the urban division. And the book was really a product of all that I learned by being sent all over Europe and even to Singapore by OECD. To see the best practice in city traffic management. And I went to cities in Germany like Bremen and Munich and saw pedestrianization on a scale that we in Britain had not at that time tried, although Norwich had its famous London Street. And that was the background to the book.
There were pretty lively politics around roads in London at the time, weren't there? Homes before roads and motorways being carved through the centre of Covent Garden. Were you involved in that debate?
Yes, I certainly was. I was one of about 90 Homes Before Roads candidates in the 1970 Greater London Council election. And our position was perfectly clear. The proposed motorways, and there were great ring motorways proposed for London by the old Greater London Council. They would have destroyed houses by the tens of thousands. And 93 of us knew that that was crazy. And so we formed a political party. And thanks to having so many candidates, we got onto the BBC News, we were interviewed on television, and in that way, we spread our message. Our electoral results were pathetic. We got 100 votes here and 120 there. But a year after the election, the motorways were cancelled.
In your book, your section on perhaps neighbourhood seems to me to predate the ideas of Carlos Moreno and the 15-minute city. You talk about creating systems that would increase access to local opportunities, which holds the promise of an urban society that is more equitable, less energy hungry than is possible in drive-in cities. And that sounds to me very much like what local areas are, how local areas are thriving in the sort of post-COVID environment. the fact that it's taken 50 years for these changes to happen, do you feel inspired by that or depressed?
Oh, Peter, I'm an optimist, so my wife pulls my leg for it. But I'm just delighted that things have moved in the direction that I hoped they would. I mean, as I made clear, really, in what I said to you a few minutes ago, it wasn't difficult to come to the conclusion that I had come to. It stood out a mile in city after city. But of course, the love of the motor car prompted all of those silly actions and urban motorways and that sort of thing. But now, broadly speaking, all over the West, I think, we've come to the conclusion that we've got to strike a completely different balance between provision for walking and bicycling and public transport and provision for cars.
In January the 29th this year, we had a revised highway code. And you wrote, or 50 years ago, pedestrians and cyclists are particularly at peril. Soft, slow objects have more to lose in any contest of strength with hard and fast ones. And that seems to me that predates the hierarchy of road users, which is now a key part of the new highway code. What do you think about that?
Well, again, of course, I agree with it. I'm delighted that the highway code has been changed. It was a source of irritation for many years, and I'm glad too that on that critical issue of if you're a pedestrian walking down a main road or an important road or a high street, and a motorist comes along and decides to turn left or right, and he or she wants to cross your path. And in the old days, you had to stop and wait and keep looking to make sure nobody would crash into you. As things evolve now, and I hope drivers get the picture and begin to observe the new rule, when you're walking down a street with side streets, you can keep on going and not be worried that a driver is going to come smashing into you.
Tell me about some of the sort of things you would like to see happen in London now.
Well, what I'm working on, and this is in connection with Living Streets, where I am now President Emeritus. I've been kicked upstairs, but I'm still, I haven't lost my enthusiasm for walking at all. And with an architect called Liam Hennessy, who has a brilliant capacity for producing graphics, he and I are working on the transformation of Hyde Park Corner so that it becomes like Trafalgar Square, where the National Gallery spills out onto a plaza and then the square in front of it. The same could be done for Wellington's house at Apsley House in Hyde Park Corner. We want to change Park Lane, which is at the moment a motorway, and devote one of the lanes, the one close to Mayfair, turn it into a cafe-lined promenade so that people can walk all the way from Oxford Street or Marble Arch down to Hyde Park Corner and on to Buckingham Palace. And we also want to see a job done at Marble Arch, because Marble Arch is at the moment in an island surrounded by traffic. And there is happily a movement to do something about Marble Arch, pushed for by the Portman estate, one of the old landowning estates in that vicinity of London.
It always strikes me as very strange that we do have a motorway running right through the heart of London, and to at least ameliorate that space would bring together the Park and Mayfair and Oxford Street, which would be a great improvement. So, Terence, thank you very much for sharing your views with me.
Peter, thank you very much for having me.